that Cahaba Project. It's the most historic area that Trussville has, and I know it's been kind of one of those hot button issues over the last few years. Just kind of take us through what's happened the last few years and what's kind of the issue at hand right now.
Well, full disclosure, I have owned 2 homes in the Cahaba Project, the Flagheap Village, or whatever you'd like to call it. When I first was offered a job here, my wife and I were looking for a home, and we looked all over the city, and we kept coming back to the Cahaba Project, and mainly because it reminded her so much of her hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, with the tree canopy and all the older houses that look the same. And so we bought a fixer-upper on Oak Street, and we did all the interior work ourselves and modernized it, and didn't change a thing on the outside, because back then it was just it was just Beth and me and our 2 golden retrievers, and so we didn't have kids yet. So we had this cute little 2-bedroom bungalow, and we just loved the neighborhood. And then in researching the neighborhood, I fell in love with it even more, because it as it turns out, and as you well know, it was a WPA project to help get us out of the Depression. So basically, the federal government paid people to build these homes, and then rented the homes to people who were later able to own the homes. So, and that neighborhood was the first Trussville, really. It was the first neighborhood in Trussville, and Trussville was nothing but a bump in the road up until that point. And it was the only one of its kind really ever done in the United States. Most of the WPA projects, in terms of housing development, were farmland. They would give you a house with several acres of land to farm. This was more generated for white collar families, people who had a job, but people who also could come back and have a garden. And they, some people had livestock. I've been told that my backyard actually had a couple of horses in the back. So,
wow.
But it's just the history of the neighborhood and the ambiance of the neighborhood is it's like no other.
There were days where, working on my project, that I was just like, what have I gotten myself into? And,
Yeah.
then the next day I would find something in the archives room at the Trussville Public Library that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I get to hold this, to look at this, documents from the 1930s and stuff like that. And it just made it all worth it.
Uh-huh. Oh, you're exactly right. And speaking of documents from the 1930s, I encourage people all the time who show the least interest in the Cahaba Project to go look at some of those documents. They're interesting. They're entertaining. I know that probably, like me, you got into the Cahaba Hub.
Oh, yeah.
Where they published all the news of the neighborhood, including who had a cold, who had chickens for sale,
the good stuff
like that. Yes, it was just the day-to-day life of those people.
Yeah.
And many of whom I recognize names. I'm sure you did too, but it was just an interesting experience.
Yeah. And I'll echo you there. What's so cool is, I feel like not a ton of people know that all of that is there and is available to view, to look at, in some cases to touch, as long as it's covered, to preserve those documents because of their age. But it really, you learn history from books, and I guess these days from YouTube and whatever else. But it was really cool that it just kind of brought everything to life, you're actually holding the minutes, like the actual handwritten in awesome cursive minutes from the 1930s, and you're really watching this community build. That was just so cool.
Another one that's super important to me is getting a historic overlay district created for the Cahaba Homestead Project. The history of that community and the history of Trussville is super important to me, and it should be important to everyone. Ultimately, I want to speak with more residents within that community, but I think it's very, very important that we get some parameters in place, to preserve the history of that community. And so that's going to be, the primary focuses.
A walk on the Greenway or a walk down Parkway Drive?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Well, I have to say, walking home from school way back when, I tripped over enough of the sidewalk on Parkway Drive to think maybe the smooth walk on the Greenway would be my favorite these days.
I like your logic there. That's a good one. A day on the Cahaba River or a day on the mall?
Oh, the Cahaba River, no doubt.
And a couple of years ago, I gave a tour to a couple of folks who were on the Alabama Historical Committee, and they were just amazed and very moved by this neighborhood. And they said that there's nothing like this in the whole rest of the country. And it's a very special place. And to me, it is the most historic part of the city of Trussville.